So, hello everyone. Hi, Andy. How are you doing?
Hi, Dan. Very good. What a wonderful day.
Good. Yeah, it's been good. How have you found it all today?
Really good. Really good discussions.
Good.
I learned a lot. It's great.
Yeah, there's lots going on. So it's amazing. I think how fast time seems to go when you're doing these virtual events. It seems to go a lot quicker. But yeah,
it does.
I can see Stefan's here as well. So
hi, Stefan.
Perfect, guys. So I'm going to leave you guys to it. We've got a few people in the queue already ready to come up, so I'll bring them up very shortly. Just a reminder to everyone before I do leave, anyone who wants to come and join us up on the stage, or not join us, I'm going to be going, join Andy and Stefan up on the stage, you need to click the button on the top right-hand corner of your screen. So click the button that says request to bring audio and video live, I think it says, and you will then be added to the queue to be brought up and to discuss the key issues and to give your thoughts with Andy and Stefan. But guys, I will pass over to you. Any key thoughts that either of you have, first of all, will be good to hear. And then, as I said, I'll start bringing people up very shortly.
Fantastic. Stefan, do you want to start, or should I start with a few thoughts?
Well, I'll offer one from our poll question this morning. It was remarkable how strong the response was that the real challenge for 5G is the business case. Yes. And we had panelists who could speak very eloquently to the solutions that the government had solved for divvying up the spectrum, but it's the underlying business case. And then I think we've seen an awful lot of examples of different ways of looking at solving that, from the heavenly down to the mundane. What do you say, Andy?
Absolutely. I mean, and the other thing I thought was interesting was 23% of people found site acquisition to be a problem. And I think that's the other thing that, for those of us that have been in the industry for a while, this is the same problem we've had for 20 years. How do you actually find and manage those sites? And I thought that tied in really well with the question about federalism, because it always amazes me when I hear Americans talking about it, this sort of state versus, country regulation and how they dovetail into each other. So I thought that was fascinating.
We have some more folks joining us here. Ruth, can we invite you to join the conversation?
I'm delighted to join the conversation. Thanks, Stefan.
Your reactions, please, to this morning, and how can you help us pick apart Andy's point there, especially about the state versus federal sort of layering of on site acquisitions? And
I could, but that's not really what I was going to pick apart. What I was going to talk about, just on the previous session, there was a question that came in that basically doubted the business case for the new non-geostationary satellites. That pointed out that you need tens, if not hundreds or thousands of them, and they need to be replaced, and they're inefficient sometimes. They cover vast areas of the ocean or something where there are no users. And I just want to point out that SpaceX went into the constellation market, not just the launch vehicle, as a way to make money to fund their trip to Mars. So they see a real business case. And furthermore, after OneWeb and Telesat and SpaceX and a few smaller companies had announced their interest, after all of that, way down in the pecking order, along comes Amazon, who says, I know I don't have first rights to the spectrum. I know I'm going to be sharing. I know I'm going to be competing with some real systems, but I see a business case, right? So these are companies that don't like to lose money, right? Jeff Bezos has not entered this field because he expects it's going to lose money. So not only is there a business case, but there's a business case, as Telesat said, for a variety of services and uses. I don't think any of us in that part of the industry are worried about the business case.
I think that's a great point. And clearly you're right. There's some very serious people who are looking at this. But also, I don't know whether you heard Mark Dambert's discussion when he talked about space debris, and he also talked about, business case and satellite throughput, etc. a little bit. So I do think, there's an excitement, there's innovation around that, and it's a hugely important space to watch. But I think ultimately that sort of business case will have to be played through. And I found it certainly very interesting to hear that debate about LEO versus GEO.
Look, GEO isn't going to go away, right? There are some applications that are ideal in GEO, and you'd be foolish to try to do them from a closer orbit than that. But similarly, there are those that are ideal from as close as you can possibly get. So not just low Earth orbit, but aerospace, right? Let's look at the HAPS. Let's look at drones. All of these technologies are going to be competing for the service that fits them best. And debris is absolutely, I think, the issue facing the space industry in this decade, right? So not only must we make no more, we've got to go up and clean up what we've left there. It's our fault, and we're going to make it worse. And let's try to get a handle on it before we cause a real accident, before we cause damage or loss of life, right? I mean, this is the wider industry's goal, not just for communication satellites, but human space flight and mining, whatever else you can think of in outer space. We have to be responsible users.
Great point, and I think it was well made. I guess Carol or Rich, are you going to come in on the LEO discussion, or is there a different topic you'd like to raise?
So if I step in, Rich Foster from UWB Alliance. So yeah, there's a couple of things from the sessions today that I found absolutely fascinating. So it was very interesting to hear from the representative of Whisper about why unlicensed spectrum is so important, and that really resonates with me, as ultra wideband is unlicensed too. It was also really interesting to hear from ESOA regarding how rapidly satellite services can be brought online in rural areas. And this is a subject that's close to my heart because my son is living in a rural area, relying heavily on 4G. And I completely agree with the comments in the last session from Viasat about how high-speed broadband is actually enabling people to move out of cities and to be able to work remotely. So I think as well that SOA's comments related to technology neutrality in the regulatory framework is really vital, and that innovation can only really happen when technologies are given an equal share of the sunlight to grow and mature. And you know, a few years ago, we wouldn't have imagined that hundreds of millions of iPhones, Apple Watches, the Xiaomi Mi 10 series and Samsung Note 20s would all be shipping with UWB. And yet it took exactly the same number of years from the creation of the rule sets to appear on the smartphones. So it's been a fascinating session, and I wanted to also just touch on a couple of other things. It was amazing to hear that Telesat is delivering 20 to 40 milliseconds of latency. And I think as well that the session from Loon was very, very interesting. The comments there about the balloon network that they're putting up. And I think that here I think in summary, it's going to take a lot of different things and technologies working together to deliver really compelling 5G everywhere, both licensed and unlicensed services. And we touched there actually on one of our kind of favorite sayings, which is, you know, that we're now living in a wireless multiverse with all these technologies performing different functions to deliver the services. So that would be my parting comment. It's been a really great day, and thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to have my say. Thank you.
Thanks for that. And I guess, you know, my question then, maybe Jennifer, now that you've come on, before you sort of put your point, what are the trade-offs we have to make? So it's very easy for us all to sit around and say, we need everything to be flexible. We need, you know, innovation to happen. We need everybody to have a chance. But what are the trade-offs that the regulators have to make? What are the decisions that some people are going to like and some people are not going to like that maybe we have to ask for? But maybe Jennifer, if you start, and then if that leads into your point, brilliant. If it doesn't, just, you know, it's all very informal now. We've got one.
Very good, thank you. Yeah, no, that's a great question, and one that regulators have obviously been struggling with for quite some time. And the time value of those decisions and how long it takes that decision to manifest itself into reality is an important consideration as well. You know, obviously from Federated Wireless's perspective, I think one of the things that we'd like to emphasize is that you don't have to have an either or situation. You can enable multiple types of service to have access to spectrum at the same time, using you know, technology that we've developed for you know, sharing between disparate services already. You know, we're currently sharing, for example, in the US in the 3.5 gigahertz band between our US military's shipborne and land-based radars, as well as with fixed satellite service earth stations, in addition to grandfathered point-to-point and point-to-multi-point wireless internet service providers. All of that is happening at the same time by leveraging, you know, automated database-driven technology, some sensors, which may not necessarily, you know, be how the sharing is enabled in every situation or, you know, indefinitely. But we do think that these database solutions will really provide regulators with more flexibility to either more efficiently transition services from one band to another, or to enable ongoing coexistence. And, you know, I think that the CBRS band showing how all of these services can coexist is a really good example of that. And while we've been operational, you know, on a commercial basis for a year now, we've not had any complaints of interference, which we think is a really good indicator that these kind of capabilities and systems can work, and really could be interesting tools for regulators to try and leverage so that they don't have to make the tough either or decisions.
Brilliant. Stefan, did you want to sort of take us on? I know Carol's waiting, and she dropped off and came back on again. So
yes, no, I was pleased to see Carol come back. And where on this conversation do you want to pick up, Carol?
Thank you, and thank you for having me. I just had to go out and get in because I wasn't hearing everyone, but I think it's working right now. Thank you. Well, just to maybe to continue with the idea that was proposed by Jennifer, in Colombia, you know, at the National Spectrum Agency, we work with some kind of spectrum sharing database that we built ourselves in this case, and this is for TV white spaces. So at the agency, we saw at 2016, I guess, that not all the broadcasters were using their frequencies. So one way to have this spectrum being used efficiently was to deploy this. And we started with a pilot with rural schools, and it worked out pretty well. And right now we're working on a second phase. So this is how we are going on these kind of connectivity solutions.
That's wonderful. I mean, I spent 3 very painful years at Ofcom trying to get white spaces working in the UK. And I think we were actually just a bit ahead of the technology, to be honest. I think we, you know, that was sort of 2012 sort of time. And I think the concepts were there, but what we see with CBRS in the States now and what we see with some of the work going on is, you know, some of the ideas that were purely ideas then actually coming to fruition and being much easier for people to do. So well done you. And I think, you know, that's fascinating sort of areas to be working in, and I think we can all learn from each other. That's brilliant. Peter, I noticed we can't see you, but
I hope you can hear me.
We can hear you perfectly. What would you like to say?
Now, so the point that I would like to make, I was fascinated by the session this morning, and I'm very passionate about rural broadband. I grew up in a small town without the high school, without traffic lights, but we had a Formula One racing track instead. So it's a town with 5,000 people. And so I've been puzzled with this whole rural broadband question pretty much since I started to work with broadband in '93. What I think is the key is the fact that we talk about smart cities, and out in the countryside, the pandemic has showed the clear shortcomings without having broadband there. And I think we need to have a stronger vision what the clever countryside could look like, where you essentially pull together three things together, both the value of consumers getting broadband, the small businesses getting broadband, and the society. Because you have certain businesses out there that never ever will move into town. I think about agriculture, rural outdoor recreation, and green energy production and stuff like that. And a lot of people right now in the pandemic that would be open to move out to the countryside because it's totally different lifestyle, more in line with their thinking and so on. And when you pull these things together, you're starting to address, it's like you can get 60-70% take rate year one instead of having it gradually, slowly growing. Well, I've got my summer house in Sweden, total rural area, came there and say, hey, we want to build fiber here, but 40% need to sign up. 83% signed up and paid before and committed before they even started digging. So I think that creating this, so the guy who built the Formula One track was my neighbor, and his name was Smokey. So we need a 5G Smokey out there in each and every community that can build up this momentum and be the guys carrying the stick. So that, because like saying, hey, perhaps 5G is not for us yet, we should go 4G, is accepting that I'm the guy that always will have used cars, not stop dreaming of shit. I want a new car and I want to be part of the digital future. So that's what I reflected on today.
I think that's brilliant, and I think the neighbours of yours in Finland, I think, did some very interesting things with government services, and using government services as a sort of anchor tenant to try and get that rollout, and linking your requirement for access to rural services to try and remove some of that digital divide.
Exactly.
The experience. Yes, go ahead, Ruth.
Oh no, I was just going to say, Peter, I don't know if that phrase was new from you, but I had never heard the clever countryside as opposed to a smart city, and I love it. I love that concept.
I do too. You heard it here first. Well done.
Yeah. No, it was born a while ago when we started to discuss this with a number of rural operators, and we were discussing that, hey, we want to do smart cities. And then I said, well, what kind of problems do you have? They're the same. Finding a parking spot in the parking garage? No, it's not those kind of applications. Or like moving from subway to commuter train, like multimodal transit. It's not those kind of, it's a different set of issues, but it's the same foundation. Yeah. You want to get it connected to the businesses and to the local functions. I think more healthcare and education, which is so vital.
Yeah,
and I think it's.
I'm glad you liked it.
Yeah, it's great, and I think, to me, one thing that's always been interesting with that point about how you get 5G, and it doesn't matter whether it's 5G, but it's just the latest technology. There's always been this assumption that 5G goes to rich urban city dwellers first, and then somehow gets rolled out gradually to other places, so that if you're a poor African country, you end up taking 2G or 3G rather than 4G or 5G. And that's a business model thing. That's the people who sell the phones basically want you to take 4G, 5G, 3G, 2G, because all the royalties go with that. So getting a cheap 5G phone, in theory, shouldn't be particularly hard. You just strip out a lot of the backwards compatibility and you look at the royalty thing. But we've never managed as an industry. 20 years ago, I was trying to do that in Vodafone and get cheap phones to roll out into Africa. And it's very difficult to get companies to do that.
Well, if I may, I think that we at OneWeb have seen that the pandemic has meant that, for example, the financial center of Wall Street, the rich people, the ones that already have 4G and think that they're experimenting with 5G, they've left the population centers, right? They've dispersed out into more rural areas, but they still want that connectivity. And suddenly they understand, right, why you want a clever countryside. So now that we have the people who used to be the haves, who didn't really get or didn't really care that there were have-nots, now that they're in that have-not category themselves, I hear the conversation changing. It's really pivoting. They get it now, right?
Yeah.
And furthermore, Andy, a few years ago when I went to visit with the previous CEO of Ofcom, the first thing she said to OneWeb was, I don't want to roll out 5G. It's not going to roll. It isn't going to start in London and then go out to everyone else. She's like, the Scottish farmer has got to have 5G at the same time, right? So this is not just you get an affordable phone or technology or the operators. This is the regulators. This is the regulators saying the next new thing. Everyone needs to get it at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think I've heard another good point of this with Friendship 5G was described as 21st century farm roads.
Mm-hmm.
And that we're not creating it for so the farmers can go into the shop in town, but we're creating it so food can come from the countryside into town, and then as a byproduct of it, the farmers can go into town over the weekend as well. And I think that saying that those roads should be paved too, shouldn't be dirt roads just because there's one lane on the road. Mm-hmm. And I think when we're looking at 5G, you typically have 5G in millimeter wave where there are 4 lanes on the road, midband where there's 2 lanes on the road, and when there's 1 lane in a road, perhaps we have 5G in low band, and that reaches 60 miles. So we can get quite far out in the countryside, even not connecting farms, but farmland even as we drive down that avenue. But I think it's a little bit, half of it is a little bit of a mindset question. Say we should get this because it will be key to get part of the digital economy versus, and we see if there's a business case there, and perhaps we can hold it off for 5 years, because then we're going to be toast. You're always going to be the ones that are 5 years late, and people won't move into your community when they're moving out of town.
Yeah. Although I think there's also a risk that you get a sort of scope creep there and say, do you know what, I need to be able to do remote surgery up a mountain with, ultra low latency. And no, you don't. You need to be able to do remote surgery, maybe in an ambulance doing it. But, I think this concept of 5G has to equal absolutely maximum speed, lowest latency, whatever, everywhere. It is actually going to hold back rural coverage if we're not careful. And I know that was a discussion that we had a lot.
Guys,
so I loved your idea, Ruth, of a COVID-inspired clever countryside. I mean, this is anybody else? Or Dan, have you got other people for us or other topics?
No, I was going to say we're close to coming to the end of time, but I mean we've got a few minutes, so if anyone did want to address that issue first, but go ahead. But we've got last couple of minutes left, but anyone who wants to address that we've got time for that anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can add an anecdote there that COVID as an accelerant has drawn in groups like the wireless internet service providers and proved that business case. And it's been interesting to watch since March that really bloom and grow.
Yeah, and if you look at it from a perspective, in our case, we took 2,500 people out of one office overnight and spread out over greater DFW or Dallas-Fort Worth. And that is not a whole lot different from providing broadband to 2,500 people in a small village and some surrounding areas. So I think the pandemic here showed it can be done. Now they're just finding a little bit the recipes for doing it. And if we can do it if we can nail it in one place, it's something that we can scale to other places down the road here. Because the hardest to get from 0 to 1, finding the model and the trick to do it. Scaling is fairly easy when you're already at 1. It's 0 to 1 that's really, really hard.
And Dan's demonstrated we can do it for conferences. We're seeing people do it for education. We're seeing it happening more and more in health. So I think the question is, what can we learn and take from this as an awful experience that everyone's going through, and actually change in the future how we want to be rather than go back to exactly where we were before.
And that is the lesson here, that COVID has also helped the consumer restate their priorities in the market.
Very good point. Yeah. Very, very good point.
Yeah, take the simple one. It's not good enough with fiber to the school any longer when like everybody's at home. You're going to take it to the school bus, broadband to the school bus, but even better, get it into everybody's home, so every single K-12 student has got access to broadband, both for homework and now in a situation like this. Because the side effect of that, if children grow up with that, they will be so versed in digital education, so they actually consider staying in the rural community instead of moving into town, just because that's where the only place you could get educated in the past. But anyways, long discussions.
Guys, I think we are coming towards it. Sorry, Jennifer, did you have any final comments?
I was just thinking about a recent statement that the FCC chairman Pai mentioned recently about the E-rate program that the U.S. government has set up to subsidize schools and classrooms to get broadband connectivity, and how the current limitations would prevent them from applying those funds to provide that connectivity to students' homes where they're currently working from. And so thinking about how to expand those kinds of subsidies beyond just necessarily a specific location, such as a classroom, and realizing that having connectivity at people's homes is an important part of ongoing education, I think is something we should all be thinking about as well, particularly in the time.
I think that's a great point, and I think it was made this morning as well about it's uptake that's important as well as availability. So what you really want to think about as a government or a regulator is how are these services used rather than is the service available. And if it's still not being used, then the question is why not? And maybe you need to put more effort into different things to drive that usage. Really interesting.
Thank you, everyone. I mean, I think we could carry on this discussion, but I think we do need to, unfortunately, draw it to a close now. But thank you, Andy and Stefan, for moderating that. And thank you to all of you for joining us, to Ruth, Jennifer, Rich, Peter, and Carol for joining us for this as well. Thank you to everyone out there who's been commenting and listening in as well. So another hugely interesting day. It's been a great day again. So really enjoyed the discussions today. Tomorrow we start again at 9 o'clock, Washington, DC time it is. So Eastern Daylight Time, I think it is, EDT. Starting in at 9 o'clock. And we're moving on tomorrow to focus specifically on mid-bands. So actually tomorrow and Friday, we're looking at different mid-bands. Tomorrow we're focusing on, first of all, 6 gigahertz band, which I'm sure is going to be a really interesting panel, and we also have a panel on the CBRS band and looking at what's happening with the CBRS ecosystem as well. So those two sessions tomorrow. We also have another showcase session, so another busy day. But I think all that's left for me to today is say thank you again to everyone who's participated. Thank you to all our participants in this session as well. Thank you to everyone out there. Wishing everyone a very pleasant rest of the day, a very pleasant evening, and looking forward to seeing everyone back here again tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Stefan. Thank you all. Cheers. Bye.